The late 1960s. Hollywood was still golden, still glamorous, still the place where legends were made and remembered. The studios were churning out classics. The Rat Pack was at its peak. And Dean Martin, smooth, charming, effortlessly cool Dean Martin, was one of the biggest stars in the world. He wasn't just a singer. He wasn't just an actor. He was an icon. When Dean walked into a room, he brought elegance with him. When he sang, the world stopped to listen. When he smiled that lazy, knowing smile, you felt like you were in on the joke. He made everything look easy. The performances, the charm, the success. He made you believe that life could be lived with a drink in one hand, a microphone in the other, and never a worry in the world. But behind that effortless facade was a man, a complicated man, a man with desires and weaknesses and secrets that the public never fully understood. And on one particular day in the late 1960s, when Hollywood gathered to say goodbye to Dean Martin, those complications would come crashing into the open in a way nobody expected. This is the story of that day. The day Dean's mistress did something unthinkable at his funeral. The day his wife showed the world what true strength looks like. The day Hollywood learned that legends aren't just created by talent. They're protected by the people who truly love them. The church on the hill. The funeral was held at a historic church in Beverly Hills, one of those grand old buildings where Hollywood had been marrying, baptizing, and burying its own for decades. The architecture was classic. The pews were polished wood, and the stained glass windows cast colored light across the faces of the mourners who filled every seat. And what mourners they were. Frank Sinatra was there, looking older and sadder than anyone had ever seen him. The loss of Dean hit Frank hard. These were brothers, not just friends. They'd built the Rat Pack together, conquered Vegas together, lived through the golden age of entertainment as a unit. Now one of them was gone, and Frank's face showed every year of grief that entailed. Sammy Davis Jr. sat nearby, tears streaming down his face without shame. Sammy never forgot what Dean had done for him, never forgot the night Dean had stood up to a mobster to defend Sammy's dignity. That kind of loyalty, that kind of brotherhood, you don't find it twice in a lifetime. And now Sammy was saying goodbye to the man who taught him what true friendship meant. There were studio executives in dark suits, their faces professionally somber. There were musicians who'd played with Dean, actors who'd worked alongside him, comedians who'd learned from him. There were producers and directors and writers, all the people who'd helped build Dean's career or been touched by his talent. And there were women, beautiful women in elegant black dresses, some openly weeping, others stoic and composed. Dean had always been surrounded by women. His charm, his looks, his voice, they drew women to him like moths to a flame. Some of these relationships were innocent. Others were not. Hollywood knew it. The tabloids whispered about it. But nobody spoke too loudly about such things. Not in those days. Not when it came to men like Dean Martin. In the front row, in the seat of honor, sat Dean's wife. She was a striking woman, not young but still beautiful, with a kind of bearing that comes from years of navigating the treacherous waters of Hollywood marriage. She wore a simple black dress, pearls at her throat, a small hat with a veil that partially obscured her face. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her back was straight. Her expression was composed. She understood the game. She'd known from the beginning what it meant to be married to Dean Martin. The late nights, the touring, the women who threw themselves at him everywhere he went. She'd made her peace with it, or so everyone assumed. She'd chosen to stay, to be the wife, to maintain the dignity of the position, even when reality was far more complicated. And she'd earned her place in that front pew. She was the one who'd been there when the cameras weren't rolling. She was the one who'd held the family together. She was the one who'd maintained the home, raised the children, kept the foundation solid, while Dean lived his glittering, chaotic life in the spotlight. This was her day as much as anyone's. Her right to mourn. Her moment to say goodbye to the man she'd loved, despite everything. The service began with a hymn. The priest spoke about Dean's life, his talent, his generosity, his impact on the world of entertainment. Friends stood to share memories, funny stories about Dean's humor, touching recollections of his kindness, tributes to his artistry. There was laughter through the tears, warmth in the grief, a sense that this was a celebration as much as a farewell. And then, about halfway through the service, the atmosphere changed. The uninvited guest. She entered from the back of the church, and heads began to turn immediately. She was young, early 30s at most, though she might have been younger, beautiful in that very specific Los Angeles way. Perfect makeup, perfectly styled hair, a figure that drew the eye whether you wanted it to or not. Her dress was black, as funeral protocol demanded, but it was designer, expensive, and cut in a way that suggested she hadn't come here to fade into the background. She wore large, dark sunglasses despite being indoors. Her heels clicked on the stone floor as she walked slowly down the center aisle, and with each step, more people noticed her. Whispers began to ripple through the pews. Who is that? Is that? Oh my God, is that her? Because some people recognize her. Not everyone, but enough. She'd been seen with Dean. Not often, not publicly in any official way, but at certain parties, certain clubs, certain late-night gatherings where the press wasn't invited but people still talked. The rumors had circulated for months, maybe longer. Dean Martin had a mistress, a serious one, not just a fling, a woman young enough to be his daughter, but who'd somehow gotten under his skin in a way that his other affairs never had. And now she was here, at his funeral, walking down the aisle like she had every right to be here, like her grief was equal to that of his wife, his children, his lifelong friends. The priest faltered slightly in his reading, unsure whether to stop or continue. Frank Sinatra's eyes narrowed. Sammy Davis Jr. looked stunned. The studio executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone could feel it. Something was about to happen, something inappropriate, something dramatic, something very un-Dean-like in its lack of class. The mistress, let's call her Elena, though that wasn't her real name, just the one the tabloids would eventually use, found a seat about 5 rows back, not in the family section, but close enough to make a statement. She removed her sunglasses with a deliberate gesture, revealing eyes that were red from crying, though whether the tears were real or cosmetic was anyone's guess. She sat down, crossed her legs, and stared at the back of the wife's head with an intensity that was almost physical. The wife didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the arrival, didn't give Elena the satisfaction of a reaction. She simply continued to sit there, composed and still, as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. The entire energy of the church had shifted. What had been a solemn, loving tribute to a Hollywood legend was now crackling with tension. Everyone in that room was now hyper-aware of the two women, the wife in the front row and the mistress 5 rows back, and the unspoken drama playing out between them. The service continued. Another hymn was sung. Another friend stood to share a memory. But nobody was really listening anymore. Every eye kept drifting back to those two women. Every mind was wondering the same thing. What was Elena going to do? Why was she here? What kind of scene was about to unfold? Because this was Hollywood, and everyone in that church had seen enough movies to know that to set up this tension, this powder keg of emotion and ego, could only end one way. Badly. 2 women, 2 claims. To understand what happened next, you have to understand what each of these women represented. The wife represented legitimacy. She was the official Mrs. Dean Martin, the woman whose name was on a marriage certificate, the mother of his children, the person who had legal and social standing. She represented the public dean, the family dean, the dean who maintained respectability even while living a life that often defied it. She had sacrificed for this position. Years of looking the other way. Years of smiling for the cameras while knowing what Dean was doing when he wasn't home. Years of maintaining dignity in the face of humiliation. Of keeping the family together despite everything that threatened to tear it apart. In return, she had security, status, the protection that came with being Dean Martin's wife. When she walked into a restaurant, the best table was waiting. When she needed something, doors opened. She lived in a beautiful home, wore beautiful clothes, moved through Hollywood society with her head held high. And on this day, she had the right to mourn publicly, to sit in the front row, to be acknowledged as the primary griever, the chief mourner, the one whose loss was greatest and most legitimate. Elena, the mistress, represented something else entirely. She represented passion, romance, The secret Dean, the man who existed outside the boundaries of marriage and responsibility. In her mind, and perhaps in Dean's when he was with her, she was his true love, his soulmate, the woman who really understood him, who didn't judge him, who accepted him fully in a way his wife supposedly couldn't. She believed, or claimed to believe, that Dean had loved her more, that their connection was deeper, more real, more meaningful than the arrangement he had with his wife. She saw herself not as a homewrecker or an affair, but as the woman Dean would have chosen if only he'd been free to choose. And she'd come to this funeral to make that claim public, not explicitly. Perhaps she wasn't going to stand up and announce it, but her presence here, her refusal to hide, her determination to be seen, it was all a statement. It said, I mattered to him. I deserve to mourn too. His wife isn't the only woman who lost him. From a certain perspective, you could almost understand it. Love, real or imagined, doesn't care about propriety. Grief doesn't respect social hierarchies. If Elena truly believed she'd loved Dean and he'd loved her, then why shouldn't she be at his funeral? But this wasn't just about love or grief. This was about respect, about boundaries, about understanding that some moments, some ceremonies, some goodbyes are too sacred to hijack for personal drama. And Elena was about to cross that line in a way that would be remembered for decades. The procession, the service ended. The final hymn was sung. The priest said the closing words. And then came the moment that every funeral builds toward, the procession, when the casket is carried out of the church and the mourners follow behind. Dean's casket was magnificent. Polished mahogany, brass handles, covered with a spray of white roses. 6 pallbearers, including Frank Sinatra and Joey Bishop, both looking like they'd aged 10 years in the last week, lifted it carefully and began the slow walk down the center aisle. The wife stood. Her children stood with her, clustered around her, offering support. She took a breath, steadied herself, and prepared to follow her husband's casket out of the church for the last time. The rest of the mourners rose to their feet out of respect. The organist played something soft and mournful. The procession began to move, and that's when Elena made her move. She stepped out of her pew and into the aisle, not to join the general procession of mourners, but to push forward, to try to walk immediately behind the family, to claim a position of prominence that was absolutely not hers to claim. People gasped. Someone said, "Oh no," out loud. Frank Sinatra actually stopped walking for a moment, his face darkening with anger. But Elena didn't stop. She moved forward quickly, her heels clicking on the stone floor, tears streaming down her face. Real tears now, born of genuine emotion or excellent acting. It was impossible to say. She was heading straight for the casket. "Dean!" she cried out, her voice echoing through the church. "Dean, I love you. I love you so much." She reached the casket and put her hands on it, her whole body shaking with sobs. The pallbearer stopped, unsure what to do. The priest looked horrified. The entire church held its breath. "He loved me," Elena said, not quite shouting but loud enough for everyone to hear. "He told me he loved me. He said I was the one. I deserved to say goodbye. I deserved to be here." It was a performance, or a breakdown, or both, and it was happening in front of 200 of Hollywood's most important people, in front of Dean's children, in front of cameras that would ensure this moment lived forever in Hollywood lore. And that's when the wife moved. The confrontation. She didn't rush. She didn't shout. She didn't make a scene of her own. She simply walked forward, slowly and deliberately, until she stood directly in front of Elena. The two women faced each other. The wife, older, composed, dressed simply but elegantly. The mistress, younger, distraught, dramatic in her grief. They couldn't have been more different if they'd tried. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The entire church was silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Then the wife spoke, her voice quiet but carrying clearly through the church. "Let go of the casket." Elena's hands tightened on the polished wood. "I have a right to be here. I loved him." "I know you did," the wife said, and there was no anger in her voice, just a kind of weary understanding. "But this is not your moment. This is not your place." "He would have wanted me here," Elena insisted, tears streaming down her face. He would have wanted me to say goodbye. The wife's expression didn't change. Perhaps. But Dean isn't here to invite you. I am, and his children are. And we're asking you to let go and leave with dignity. You don't understand, Elena said desperately. We loved each other. Really loved each other. Not like... She stopped herself, but everyone knew what she'd been about to say. Not like you. That could have been the moment it all exploded. That could have been when the wife lost her composure, when she slapped Elena or screamed at her or created the kind of scandalous scene that would have made headlines for weeks. But she didn't. Instead, she reached out and gently but firmly removed Elena's hands from the casket. The touch was almost kind, almost sympathetic, but it was also absolutely final. I'm sure you did love him, the wife said quietly. Dean was easy to love. That was his gift and his curse. But I was his wife. I am his wife. I stood beside him for 25 years. I bore his children. I built a life with him. And on this day, at this moment, my claim takes precedence. Not because my love was greater. I don't presume to measure love, but because this is how we do things. There are rules. There are boundaries. And you've crossed them. She turned to two large men in dark suits, security, though they'd been standing discreetly at the back of the church until now, and nodded once. Please escort this woman out, she said, gently. But immediately, the security men moved forward. Elena tried to pull away, tried to protest, but they took her arms, not roughly, but firmly, and began guiding her toward a side door. This isn't fair. Elena cried out, Dean! Dean, I love you. But the wife had already turned away. She returned to her position behind the casket, straightened her veil, and nodded to the pallbearers to continue. As Elena was removed from the church, still crying, still protesting, her voice echoing and then fading, the procession resumed. The casket moved forward. The family followed. The mourners processed out in order, 2 by 2, row by row. And the entire time, the wife never looked back. The aftermath, outside the church, Elena made one last attempt. As the casket was being loaded into the hearse, she broke free from security guards and rushed forward again, calling Dean's name. This time, the wife didn't even turn around. She simply raised one hand, a signal, and the security men caught Elena before she could reach the hearse. They held her back, not brutally but immovably, while the family got into their cars. Photographers captured it all. The flashbulbs popped. The cameras rolled. This was going to be news, scandal, the kind of story that people would whisper about for years. But as the cars pulled away, heading to the cemetery for the private burial, something interesting happened. The other mourners, Sinatra, Sammy, the studio executives, the fellow performers, they all walked past Elena without acknowledging her. Not one of them stopped to comfort her. Not one of them suggested she'd been treated unfairly, because they understood what she apparently didn't. Funerals aren't about the dead person's desires or relationships. They're about giving the living a framework to grieve. They're about honoring bonds and hierarchies and agreements that were made long before death arrived. Dean might have loved Elena. He probably did, in his way, but he'd married his wife. He'd built a life with her. He'd made promises to her, broken some of them, kept others, but ultimately chosen to stay with her year after year. And that mattered. That counted. That earned her the right to be the chief mourner, to sit in the front row, to determine who was welcome and who wasn't. Elena had wanted to make a grand romantic gesture, to claim Dean's love publicly, to be remembered as the great love of his life. Instead, she made herself into a cautionary tale about knowing your place, respecting boundaries, and understanding that love, real, lasting, legitimate love, isn't just about passion. It's about commitment. It's about showing up. It's about earning your position through years of loyalty, not claiming it through months of secret meetings. The whispered legend. The story spread through Hollywood like wildfire. Did you hear what happened at Dean's funeral? The mistress showed up and tried to claim the body. His wife grabbed her by the arm and threw her out. Like all Hollywood stories, it got exaggerated in the retelling. Some versions had the wife physically dragging Elena out by her hair. Others had Elena throwing herself on the casket and having to be pried off. Still others claimed there'd been a screaming match in front of everyone. The truth was both more and less dramatic. More dramatic because it really happened. Because that confrontation between wife and mistress actually took place in front of Hollywood royalty. Less dramatic because the wife had handled it with such extraordinary composure, such dignity, such restraint. She could have made it ugly. God knows she had the right. This woman had been sleeping with her husband, had probably known he was married, had shown up at his funeral uninvited, and tried to make herself the center of attention. The wife could have screamed, slapped, created a scene that would have been completely justified. But she'd chosen a different path. She'd been firm but not cruel, direct but not vicious. She'd asserted her authority without descending to theatrics. And in doing so, she'd won. Not just that moment, but the entire narrative. Because when people told the story later, they didn't talk about the great love between Dean and Elena. They talked about the wife's strength, her dignity, her absolute command of the situation. She became the hero of the story, not by being the most dramatic or the most heartbroken, but by being the most adult, the most composed, the most aware of what the moment required. The true legacy. Years later, when people talked about Dean Martin, they talked about his voice, his charm, his movies, his television show. They talked about the Rat Pack in Vegas and the golden age of entertainment. But among those who'd been at the funeral, who'd witnessed that confrontation, there was another story, a quieter story, a story about what it means to truly honor someone's memory. Because the wife could have let Elena stay, could have ignored her, let her cry and make her claims and create her scene, could have taken a high road by allowing everyone to grieve in their own way. But she understood something important. Dean's legacy mattered more than anyone's feelings. The way he was remembered, the dignity of his farewell, the respect shown to his life. These things mattered. And allowing a mistress to hijack his funeral, to turn it into a spectacle about secret love and forbidden passion, would have cheapened everything, would have reduced Dean Martin from a legend to a tabloid story, would have made his funeral about scandal rather than celebration. So she'd made the hard choice, the unpopular choice, the choice that some people criticize as cold or unfeeling. She'd drawn a line. She'd enforced a boundary. She protected Dean's legacy, even though he wasn't there to do it himself. That's what real love looks like. Not the passionate, dramatic, all-consuming kind that makes for good movies. The other kind, the kind that thinks long-term, the kind that considers legacy and memory, and how someone will be remembered 50 years from now. The kind that says, I will protect you, even from the consequences of your own weaknesses. I will honor you, even when you didn't always honor me. I will guard your final chapter, because that's what love does. The last word. Dean Martin is gone now, has been for decades. Elena, whoever she really was, faded into obscurity, remembered only as a footnote in someone else's story. Even the wife has passed away, taking her memories and her pain and her strength with her. But that moment in the church endures. It endures because it was real, because it exposed something true about love and power and dignity and the complicated nature of human relationships. It endures because it showed us that legends aren't just created by talent. They're protected by the people who understand what really matters, by the people strong enough to make hard decisions, by the people who love not just with passion, but with wisdom. On that day in the late 1960s, Hollywood learned that behind every legend stands someone strong enough to guard the final chapter. Someone who understands that how we say goodbye matters just as much as how we lived. Dean Martin's wife gave him that goodbye. Not the one his mistress wanted, full of drama and romance and scandalous revelation. The one he deserved. Dignified, respectful, focused on his contributions rather than his complications. And in doing so, she had the last word. Not through shouting, but through silence. Not through fighting, but through simply being unmovable. That's the real Hollywood ending. Not the mistress's tragic tears. The wife's quiet strength. That's the story worth remembering. That's what true love looks like when the cameras stop rolling, and the only audience that matters is history itself. Dean Martin was gone, but his legacy remained protected. And on that day, Hollywood learned that some battles aren't won with drama or passion or grand gestures. They're won by the person who understands that dignity, once lost, can never be reclaimed, and who refuses to let it be lost in the first place.